Here we stand at the precipice of another Spooktober season. Samhain is upon us, and All Saints' Day looms large with the 1st of November. But Samhain, the basis for American Halloween, where did it come from? Well, fortunately, I'm here to tell you. A long time ago, before there were computers, televisions, cars, electricity, a time when people went from one place to another by walking, or riding a horse, or swinging your hammer. A time when families gathered near the fire to stay warm as the weather turned cold. A time when children would listen to stories that answered their curious questions. Long before people were called Christians or pagans, a fair-skinned, dark-haired clan called Celts lived on a beautiful green island. On this island, at the end of each summer harvest, they would have a celebration called the Festival of Samhain. Samhain marks the end of the year, when skies darken early and the weather turns cold. They knew that some among them would not survive the winter. They would gather and build a giant bonfire, share the harvest with neighbors, and talk with friends. They would wear costumes and try to tell each other's fortunes. They danced, they sang, they fought valiantly, playing all sorts of games. At the end of the celebration, they carried embers from the bonfire in a turnip to light their fireplaces at home, to help protect them during the winter. Until the Romans conquered the Celtic lands. The Romans combined two of their own festivals with the Celtic celebration of Samhain. One was Feralia, a day in late October when the Romans honored the dead. The other honored Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and trees. The apple is the symbol of Pomona. Bobbing for apples, anyone? Many years later, Christians and Christianity spread to Celtic lands. The Pope replaced the Celtic festival with a religious holiday. November 1st became All Hallows-Mon, or All Saints' Day. The night before, which was the night of Samhain, became All Hallows' Eve, and eventually, Halloween. The celebration remained similar to Samhain. They still had bonfires, costumes, and parades, parties, what have you. When Europeans came to America, they brought their hallowed traditions with them. As all the traditions of the different ethnic groups meshed, an American amalgamation appeared. Dressing up in costumes, going from house to house, and asking for food or money are customs from Ireland and England. Telling fortunes the night before Halloween by opening cabbages and occasionally leaving them on the doorsteps came from a Scottish tradition that adopted a negative connotation as an excuse for petty crime and vandalism, dubbed Cabbage Night in Vermont and New Hampshire, but far less severe as the Devil's Night arsons that would rage across Detroit in the mid-20th century. These customs became America's trick-or-treat tradition. When the Irish came to America, they found pumpkins to be more plentiful than the turnips they used for jack-o'-lanterns, so a hollowed-out pumpkin became the American jack-o'-lantern. Traditions continue to morph as time passes. In another few generations, what constitutes American Halloween may not be recognizable to those of us alive today, just as our current traditions are mere tributes to the celebrations of the past. But not all October traditions are games to be toyed with. This is The October Game by Ray Bradbury, closing out Spooktober 2021 on Stories Telling Stories.
He put the gun back into the bureau drawer and shut the drawer. No, not that way. Louise wouldn't suffer. It was very important that this thing have, above all, duration. Duration through imagination. How to prolong the suffering. How, first of all, to bring it about. Well, the man standing before the bedroom mirror carefully fitted his cufflinks together. He paused long enough to hear the children run by swiftly on the street below. Outside this warm 2-story house, like so many gray mice, the children, like so many leaves. By the sound of the children, you knew the calendar day. By their screams, you knew what evening it was. You knew it was very late in the year. October. The last day of October, with white bone masks and cut pumpkins and the smell of dropped candle wax. No. Things hadn't been right for some time. October didn't help any. If anything, it made things worse. He adjusted his black bow tie. If this were spring, he nodded slowly, quietly, emotionlessly, at his image in the mirror, then there might be a chance. But tonight, all the world was burning down into ruin. There was no green spring, none of the freshness, none of the promise. There was a soft running in the hall. "That's Marion," he told himself. "My little one." All 8 quiet years of her. Never a word. Just her luminous gray eyes and her wondering little mouth. His daughter had been in and out all evening, trying on various masks, asking him which was most terrifying, most horrible. They had both finally decided on the skeleton mask. It was just awful. It would scare the beans from people. Again, he caught the long look of thought and deliberation he gave himself in the mirror. He had never liked October. Ever since he first lay in the autumn leaves before his grandmother's house many years ago and heard the wind that swayed the empty trees. It had made him cry without a reason. And a little of that sadness returned each year to him. It always went away with the spring. But it was different tonight. There was a feeling of autumn coming to last 1,000,000 years. There would be no spring. He had been crying quietly all evening. It did not show, not a vestige of it, on his face. It was hidden somewhere, and it wouldn't stop. A rich, syrupy smell of sweets filled the bustling house. Louise had laid out apples in new skins of toffee. There were vast bowls of punch freshly mixed, stringed apples in each window, scooped, vented pumpkins veering triangularly from each cold window. There was a water tub in the center of the living room, waiting, with a sack of apples nearby for dunking to begin. All that was needed was the catalyst, the inpouring of children, to start the apples bobbing, the stringed apples to pendulating in the crowded doors, the sweets to vanish, the halls to echo with fright or delight. It was all the same. Now, the house was silent with preparation, and just a little more than that. Louise had managed to be in every other room save the room he was in today. It was her very fine way of intimidating. "Oh, look, Mitch, see how busy I am. So busy that when you walk into a room, I'm in there, always something I need to do in another room. Just see how I dash about." For a while, he had played a little game with her, a nasty, childish game. When she was in the kitchen, then he came to the kitchen, saying, "I need a glass of water." After a moment, he, standing drinking water, she, like a crystal witch over the caramel brew bubbling like a prehistoric mud pot on the stove, she said, "Oh, I must light the pumpkins," and she rushed to the living room to make the pumpkins smile with light. He came after her, smiling. "I must get my pipe." "Oh, the cider," she had cried, running to the dining room. "I'll check my cider," he had said. But when he tried to follow her, she ran to the bathroom and locked the door. He stood outside the bathroom door, laughing strangely and senselessly, his pipe gone cold in his mouth. And then, tired of the game, but stubborn, he waited another 5 minutes. There was not a sound from the bath, and lest she enjoy it in any way, knowing that he waited outside, irritated, he suddenly jerked about and walked upstairs, whistling merrily. At the top of the stairs he had waited. Finally, he had heard the bathroom door unlatch, and she had come out, and life below stairs had resumed, as life in a jungle must resume once a terror had passed on away and the antelope returned to their spring. Now, as he finished tying his bow tie and put on his dark coat, there was a mouse rustle in the hall. Marion appeared in the door, all skeletons in her disguise. "How do I look, Papa?" "Fine." From under the mask, blonde hair showed. From the skull socket, small blue eyes smiled. He sighed. Marion and Louise, the two silent denouncers of his virility, his dark power. What alchemy had there been in Louise that took the dark of a dark man and bleached the dark brown eyes and black hair and washed and bleached the ingrown baby all during the period before birth until the child was born? Marion, blonde, blue-eyed, ruddy-cheeked. Sometimes he suspected that Louise had conceived the child as an idea, completely asexual, an immaculate conception of contemptuous mind and cell. As a firm rebuke to him, she had produced a child in her own image, and, to top it, she had somehow fixed the doctor so he shook his hand and said, "Sorry, Mr. Wilder, your wife will never have another child. This is the last one." "And I wanted a boy," Mitch had said 8 years ago. He almost bent to take hold of Marion now, in her skull mask. He felt an inexplicable rush of pity for her, because she had never had a father's love, only the crushing, holding love of a loveless mother. But most of all, he pitied himself, that somehow he had not made the most of a bad birth, enjoyed his daughter for herself, regardless of her not being dark and a son like himself. Somewhere, he had missed out. Other things being equal, he would have loved the child. But Louise hadn't wanted a child anyway in the first place. She had been frightened of the idea of birth. He had forced the child on her, and from that night, all through the year until the agony of the birth itself, Louise had lived in another part of the house. She had expected to die with the forced child. It had been very easy for Louise to hate this husband, who so wanted a son that he gave his only wife over to the mortuary. But Louise had lived, and in triumph. Her eyes the day he came to the hospital were cold. "I'm alive," they said, "and I have a blonde daughter. Just look." And when he had put out a hand to touch, the mother had turned away to conspire with her new pink daughter child, away from that dark forcing murder. It had all been so beautifully ironic. His selfishness deserved it. But now it was October again. There had been other Octobers, and when he thought of the long winter, he had been filled with horror year after year to think of the endless months mortared into the house by an insane fall of snow, trapped with a woman and child, neither of whom loved him, for months on end. During the 8 years, there had been respites. In spring and summer, you got out, walked, picnicked. These were desperate solutions to the desperate problem of a hated man. But in winter, the hikes and picnics and escapes fell away with the leaves. Life, like a tree, stood empty, the fruit picked, the sap run to earth. Yes, you invited people in, but people were hard to get in winter with blizzards and all. Once he had been clever enough to save for a Florida trip. They had gone south. He had walked in the open. But now, the 8th winter coming, he knew things were finally at an end. He simply could not wear this one through. There was an acid walled off in him that slowly had eaten through tissue and bone over the years, and now, tonight, it would reach the wild explosive in him, and all would be over. There was a mad ringing of the bell below. In the hall, Louise went to see Marion, without a word, ran down to greet the first arrivals. There were shouts and hilarity. He walked to the top of the stairs. Louise was below, taking wraps. She was tall and slender and blonde to the point of whiteness, laughing down upon the new children. He hesitated. What was all this? The years, the boredom of living. Where had it gone wrong? Certainly not the birth of the child alone. But it had been a symbol of all their tensions, he imagined. His jealousies and his business failures and all the rotten rest of it. Why didn't he just turn, pack a suitcase, and leave? No, not without hurting Louise as much as she had hurt him. It was simple as that. Divorce wouldn't hurt her at all. It would simply be an end to the numb indecision. If he thought divorce would give her pleasure in any way, he would stay married for the rest of his life, for damned spite. No, he must hurt her. Figure some way, perhaps, to take Marion away from her, legally. Yes, that was it. That would hurt her most of all, to take Marion away. "Hello down there!" He descended the stairs, beaming. Louise didn't look up. "Hi, Mr. Wilder!" The children shouted and waved as he came down. By 10 o'clock, the doorbell had stopped ringing. The apples were bitten from stringed doors. The pink faces were wiped dry from the apple bobbing. Napkins were smeared with toffee and punch. And he, the husband, with pleasant efficiency, had taken over. He took the party right out of Louise's hands. He ran about talking to the 20 children and the 12 parents who had come and were happy with the special spiked seltzer he had fixed them. He supervised pin the tail on the donkey, spin the bottle, musical chairs, and all the rest, amid fits of shouting laughter. Then, in the triangular-eyed pumpkin shine, all house lights out, he cried, "Hush! Follow me," tiptoeing towards the cellar. The parents, on the outer periphery of the costumed riot, commented to each other, nodding at the clever husband, speaking to the lucky wife. How well he got on with children, they said. The children crowded after the husband, squealing. "The cellar!" he cried. "The tomb of the witch!" More squealing. He made a mock shiver. "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." The parents chuckled. One by one, the children slid down a slide which Mitch had fixed up from the lengths of table section into the dark cellar. He hissed and shouted ghastly utterances after them. A wonderful wailing filled dark pumpkin-lighted house. Everybody talked at once. Everybody but Marion. She had gone through all the party with minimum sound or talk. It was all inside her, all the excitement and joy. What a little troll, he thought, with a shut mouth and shiny eyes, so had watched her own party like so many serpentines thrown before her. Now, the parents, with laughing reluctance, they slid down the short incline, uproarious, while little Marion stood by, always wanting to see it all, to be last. Louise went down without help. He moved to aid her, but she was gone even before he bent. The upper house was empty and silent in the candle shine. Marion stood by the slide. "Here we go," he said, and picked her up. They sat in a vast circle in the cellar. Warmth came from the distant bulk of the furnace. The chairs stood in a long line along each wall. 20 squealing children, 12 rustling relatives, alternatively spaced, with Louise down at the far end, Mitch up at this end, near the stairs. He peered, but saw nothing. They had all grouped to their chairs, catch as you can in the blackness. The entire program from here on out was to be enacted in the dark. He as Mr. Interlocutor. There was a child scampering, a smell of damp cement, and the sound of the wind out in the October stars. "Now!" cried the husband in the dark cellar. "Quiet!" Everybody settled. The room was black. Not a light, not a shine, not a glint of an eye. A scraping of crockery, a metal rattle. "The witch is dead," intoned the husband. "Yee!" said the children. "The witch is dead. She has been killed, and here is the knife she was killed with." He handed over the knife. It was passed from hand to hand, down and around the circle, with chuckles and little odd cries and comments from the adults. "The witch is dead, and this is her head," whispered the husband, and handed an item to the nearest person.
"Oh, I know how this game is played,"
some child cried, happily in the dark.
"He gets some old chicken innards from the icebox and hands them around and says, 'These are her innards.' And he makes a clay head and passes it for her head, and passes a soup bone for her arm, and then takes a marble and says, 'This is her eye.' And he takes some corn and says, 'This is her teeth.' And he takes a sack of plum pudding and gives that and says, 'This is her stomach.' I know how this is played." "Hush, you spoil everything,"
some girl said. "The witch came to harm, and this is her arm," said Mitch. The items were passed and passed like hot potatoes around the circle. Some children screamed, wouldn't touch them. Some ran from their chairs to stand in the center of the cellar until the grisly items had passed.
"Oh, it's only chicken innards,"
scoffed a boy.
"Come back, Helen."
Shot from hand to hand, with small scream after scream, the items went down, down, to be followed by another and another. "The witch cut apart, and this is her heart," said the husband. 6 or 7 items moving at once through the laughing, trembling dark. Louise spoke up.
"Marion, don't be afraid. It's only play."
Marion didn't say anything.
"Marion?"
asked Louise.
"Are you afraid?"
Marion didn't speak. "Oh, she's all right," said the husband. "She's not afraid." On and on the passing, the screams, the hilarity. The autumn wind sighed about the house, and he, the husband, stood at the head of the dark cellar, intoning the words, handing out the items.
"Marion?"
asked Louise again from far across the cellar. Everybody was talking.
"Marion!"
called Louise. Everybody quieted.
"Marion, answer me! Are you afraid?"
Marion didn't answer. The husband stood there, at the bottom of the cellar steps. Louise called,
"Marion, are you there?"
No answer. The room was silent.
"Where's Marion?"
called Louise.
"She was here,"
said a boy.
"Maybe she's upstairs." "Marion!"
No answer. It was quiet. Louise cried out,
"Marion! Marion!"
"Turn on the lights,"
said one of the adults. The items stopped passing. The children and adults sat with the witch's items in their hands. "No!" Louise gasped. There was a scraping of her chair, wildly in the dark. "No, don't turn on the lights! Oh, God, 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 don't turn them on! Please, don't turn on the lights! Don't!" Louise was shrieking now. The entire cellar froze with the scream. Nobody moved. Everyone sat in the dark cellar, suspended in the suddenly frozen task of this October game. The wind blew outside, banging the house. The smell of pumpkins and apples filled the room with the smell of the objects in their fingers, while one boy cried,
"I'll go upstairs and look."
And he ran upstairs, hopefully, and out around the house, 4 times around the house, calling,
"Marion! Marion! Marion!"
over and over, and at last coming slowly down the stairs into the waiting, breathing cellar, and saying to the darkness,
"I can't find her."
Then, some idiot turned on the lights. The end. SDS Spooktober 2021 was produced in collaboration with Stories Telling Stories and STS Media Group. scaring itself silly at Milt House Studios in Milton, Vermont, casting around the globe to your frontal lobe, wherever podcasts are found. Spooktober is also streaming on YouTube at Stories Telling Stories. Make sure to give us a review wherever you stream our show. We really appreciate it. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram, give us a subscribe on YouTube, and consider supporting us on Patreon for exclusive rewards starting at $1 a month or more. And until next year, stay spooky.